Okay, what I want to do now is I want to go through the next section, which is section 6.3. And in this section, we're going to be looking at what is known as nth roots and rational exponents. What that really means is we're looking at exponents that are fractions, or we're looking at roots. You'll notice there that are to the n power, a squared, a to the third, which is cubed, fourth powers, fifth powers, etc. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at. So there's two forms of equations that we can identify when we're looking at these. Notice that we have a to the n power equals b. Therefore, a equals b to the 1 over n. So if we were to look at it from a square root standpoint, if I have 3 squared equals 9, then we know that 3 equals 9 to the 1/2 power, which is really saying the same thing as the square root of 9. So n is what is known as the index. B is what is known as the radicand. So it's, what we're putting. So 9 would be my radicand. 2 would be my index in this particular case. So we have two forms that we can look at. We can look at exponential forms. So we have, as I have written up there, 3 equals 9 to the 1/2 power. And then radical form, which would be 3 equals the square root of 9. Now notice I put a 2 there. Normally with square root, we don't put the 2 there, or we don't put a number specifically there, unless it's I should say we don't put a 2 there because 2 is implied if we're doing the square root. We have to put a number if it is not a square root. And then 1 over n is what is known as the rational exponent. Okay. So what we're going to do a little bit later on is we're going to go to the use of a calculator. So what is 9 squared, 9 to the 1/2? In class, we're going to do this with the calculators, so that you can see how to be able to use a calculator to figure this out. And of course, obviously, we want to know the difference. 9 squared is 81, 9 to the 1/2 is 3, 4 squared is 16, 4 to the 1/2 is 2. And we'll go over that. Okay, so here are some important concepts. Negative 2 to the 6th power equals 64. Now, how do I know that? Because if I multiply negative 2 6 times, so if I do negative 2 times 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 negative 2, of course, there's an even number of negatives, so it becomes positive, and then all I have to do is multiply all the 2's together, and that becomes 64. So negative 2 is the 6th root of 64. We also know that 2 to the 6th power is also 64. So if I multiply all those 2's together, and of course they're all positive, so it's going to stay positive. That should just be a 2, not a negative. I know that should just be a 2 and not a negative. So then that should be plus 64 as well. Okay, so we have a couple of 6th roots of 64. One is negative 2 and one is positive 2. However, when we look at negative 3 to the 3rd, that becomes negative 27, but 3 to the 3rd is positive 27, so they're different. So not every number has multiple roots. There could be multiple roots in some cases. There may not be multiple roots in other cases. It really just depends. So let's look at square roots. So if I take the square root of 9x squared, I can do those separately. The square root of 9 is, of course, 3. And the square root of x squared is just x. Now, we're going to look at it in a little bit broader view, maybe a little bit differently. So I'm going to take the square root of 3 times 3 times x, and then for every 2 numbers or 2 letters, 2 of the same thing, I take 1 out. So notice I can take out a 3 and I can take out an x. So that's where the 3x comes from. Now over here, obviously 12 is not a perfect square. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and break it down. I have 4 times 3 times x times x times x. And I'm just breaking it down so that you can see what we're doing here. And of course, that becomes the square root of 2 times 2 times 3 times x times x times x. So for every 2, I can take out one of those numbers. I can't take out a 3. Notice I have two x's, so I can take out one x. Therefore, I have left over 3 and an x, 3 and an x here. And so I have 2x square root of 3x, and that's reduced down. Okay, now if I have a plus or minus in front of it, of course, plus or minus just means that I have two different answers. So the square root of 36 plus or minus would be 6, because that is 6 times 6. And obviously this is two ways to think about it. It's x to the fourth times x to the fourth, because we add those powers when we're multiplying similar terms. And so I could just take out an x to the fourth there. Okay. And so that's what we have for the first part. Really, it's just an introduction and starting to get used to dealing with these types of rational expressions.